Some of the things I want to cover today. If you've been coming, if you're a regular, we've been talking about server side. We've been talking about basically the volatile market, cookies going away, what that means for the market. And one of the big touch points that everybody's talking about is first party data. So I want to talk about what's moving around in first party data, what people are thinking about in that space, kind of what that is. That leads into some new technologies. Um, Google has their privacy sandbox. There's Flock and Fledge. I'll talk about what those are, and we'll go into why they're becoming important, and then ultimately, that kind of technology is leading into walled gardens. So we'll talk a little bit about why those are getting important and how they're kind of positioned in the space. That's just the general overview. I guess we can go ahead and get into it. Sorry, I'm going to cough a little bit. I'm still getting over a cold a little bit, so you guys will have to excuse me. So basically with the concept of cookies going away, so does a large amount of the power of third-party data. The reason third-party data is powerful is it's kind of everywhere and it's able to connect everywhere via cookie match tables. So once you don't have the ability to kind of fingerprint users and track people in all these places, expect even not just the cookies. I mean, if you look at the whole, like, Safari itself is blocking third-party tags, not cookies. Like, they're literally, the JavaScript can't even collect. So you're just seeing third-party get targeted kind of from every angle, and it's getting a little bit harder to collect data, which turns people to first-party data. And there's a couple of new concepts within first-party data that are worth talking about, which I'll get to in a minute. But then there's a couple old-fashioned ones that are just becoming important again. Number one being the incentive for people to log in on your website. It's kind of gone away that you didn't really need logins, and like especially when you're used to e-commerce or like checkout as a guest, there's not a lot of incentive. Like if you really want to, they want less barrier to entry, but that's actually going to have a pretty hardcore impact on marketing. So something we can kind of sit in the space a little bit if you guys have any ideas, or I can move on if we want to. But something that I'm interested in it is there isn't really an industry solution that's nailing down that value back to the customer for signing in or any creative ideas in that space. I've heard some wild ideas like involving crypto and being able to actually, if you sign in, you're part of a miner, or you get a piece of a miner. That just absolutely wild ideas, which is obviously a little crazy, but it's kind of fun. Do you guys have any thoughts on what we could be doing as an industry to push people to signing in? Or I know we're not really UX people, but it's a fun little interesting place to play for a minute.
No, it is. I think a lot of it comes down to kind of the value of what your site is, because every space it's going to be very different as far as where that goes. I think the biggest benefit to log in for a lot of things is really the personalization that you get by having an account. It means you don't have to waste your time scrolling through things that you're not interested in, or and then they get better at using algorithms to help target like the things that you're interested in. Obviously, the like ad perspective is a part of that, but personalization goes a long way. There's so many times I create an account just because it is like, if it's a site that I'm going to go to with any sort of regularity, then logging in is usually a benefit to it.
Yeah, so you kind of touched on something interesting there, which was another one of my points, which I really wasn't considering connecting these, but they sort of do need to be connected. If you think about Apple right now, if you think about Apple in the space, they've very clearly drawn a line in the sand about what data is to be collected and how they feel about privacy. Now, I don't completely agree with their image. I think some data is worth being collected and it's fair, but to each their own, and each company is going to have its image. But what's becoming more popular is your branding as a company in the public space, and publicly saying what you're willing to collect and what you're going to do with that. So sort of what Seth was just saying, where if I'll use my girlfriend for example is into makeup and she wants to have like certain makeup deals and she wants to engage with that client. She wants to sign in if she understands that's going to get her coupons, that's going to get more things. Like she's signing up for that remarketing, understanding the transaction that's happening. There's this fear. I actually asked my girlfriend about this, who doesn't know about my job as much, obviously that I do. And I was like, what is your perception of all of this? And it's like, well, I don't want them like knowing where I am and what I'm doing. And I'm like, that's not really what they're trying to do with tracking you. I mean, they're not listening to your conversations to figure anything out other than they want to know how you feel in the marketing space. And the companies that are figuring out from a digital advertising perspective how to interface and kind of brand themselves as that company that this is what we're collecting, this is how we'll use it, nothing else, is an interesting way to do that transaction of like, please sign in, you will get coupons from us, we are going to use you signing in so we can show you when there's ads and you might want to spend something.
I think the obvious reason to get people to log in, other than what Seth mentioned, was personalization. I do think that incentives are huge, and that's going to get everybody to sign in if they actually like your site or if they like your products. I think that's massive. Just giving away something so simple and free, that's probably free to the end or to the company anyway. Why not offer that? And then you can produce better ads or better something else that will drive money to your business in another way, even though you might lose a little bit giving away those incentives. And it's probably a fraction of a penny that you're losing, really.
Exactly. 100%.
So what about the other end of the spectrum where you're some sites like I think like Medium and some of the news sites in particular, it's more of a like, we'll let you see a couple of these things for free, but then after that you have to create an account and log in, even if it's still free. But obviously it's a different model. I think at least for me, and I would assume a lot of other users are this way too, is that more so makes it so people don't want to visit your site if they are resilient to creating an account.
So I was going to say something and you're throwing me softballs here. It's feeding right back into what I was going to say. There creates a need when we're talking about this. Like if you're going to give away coupons, if you're going to do a loyalty plan, or you're going to do a barrier to entry, sites like Medium make money off of advertising. They need people to come to their site, or they need to sign up for like premium articles. They need some kind of, and obviously you're going to sign in if you have some kind of like, you're reading this. Otherwise, they need to go off of advertising. So they have a concept of, if someone just clicks one article and leaves, you need to actually sign in, and we need to get a hold of you to get that value down the line. They figured something out, or at least I hope they have, and they're not making decisions willy-nilly. But what this is going to create is a market for understanding exactly how much money you'll make off of your marketing campaigns in this new world, and how much you're willing to give away to get someone into those channels. So there's, if it costs 7 cents to acquire somebody and there's a likelihood that you'll make $1 off them, you're going to want to do that. But understanding exactly what those actual trade-offs are, and that's actually where that Bitcoin idea came from, or the crypto was, someone was like, I'll give away a little bit of crypto, which people think is cool, to get them into a system where I'll be able to advertise them as long as I understand that transaction. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I'm with you, Seth. It's annoying. And I think it's a huge missed opportunity, because like, at least in like the analytics that I've kind of really jumped into from e-commerce spaces, most of the time it's like, how do I get people to buy the second product or come back for the second time, right? If they're going to come back a second time, they're going to come back a 20th time. But you have so many people that buy once. And so if you have that model where like, okay, you can consume 3 things and then we're going to force you to log in, I think that you're kind of like missing that. You're missing the point there, of like actually being able to target them a little bit earlier and create that like recurring visitor, which is significantly more important.
Yeah. So we're kind of getting to two points that this conversation can naturally evolve to. So we understand the business value of figuring out someone to get into the system so that we can identify someone within our system. Why? Because then we can put them in behavioral buckets. So one of the things that we're trying to do is, if we have their ID and we have their behavior, then we also, with that, a CDP can collect advertiser IDs, and then from that behavior remarket out to them for advertising. So within our site, we can control how behavior interacts, what advertisers have brought people to us, what their ID is with that advertiser, and then how we can reach back out to them. And that all can kind of be solved, which is why first party is on the rise. Also, we're not going down this path because we did this last week. And if people have questions or want us to go back to our last month, if they want us to go back down this, we can. But with server side tag management containers coming, it's a little bit easier to collect first party data too, because it's flowing through your cloud and you can kind of just drop stuff off while it's on its way. So before it goes off to the third party places, you can kind of just drop it off into your own cloud and build things. So it's even, the barrier to entry is getting smaller on that. So we understand how advertising is going to work inside our website. And we understand the push for getting people to log in and what that marketing value is and what we're going to, that world's kind of, it's not too much affected. It's just becoming more powerful. What is affected is all these advertisers have tags running on everyone's website, and they understand how everyone is acting on everyone's websites. And now that system is largely broken. So they know if I've gone to this website. So if I went to Dick's Sporting Goods, another sporting goods store doesn't know that I went to Dick's Sporting Goods, but the advertiser knows I went to Dick's Sporting Goods, and they'll tell that store, and that system's sort of being broken with third-party cookies going away. What they're attempting to do in a privacy-centric thing is called cohorts. They're putting people into cohorts via a couple of techniques. Basically, due to behavior that you're acting in websites, you're going to get put into a group of people. So rather than being like, this person is into sports, in my scenario, I would get thrown into a sports group so that an advertiser can say, give me everybody that's interested in sports. Now, they don't know that I'm in that group. They don't know who I am. It's still anonymous, but we're being put into large groups for behavioral things that are of use to advertisers. So that's one of the things that's being proposed and one of the ways that the industry is going. So I'll talk about a couple definitions of examples of these, and then we'll open up and play in the space for a second. So Google had come up with a concept called turtle dove, and it's been brought to fruition in a I don't even want to call it a platform, a concept called Fledge. Fledge is, I'm reading off of this because I don't know this off the top of my head, first locally executed decision over groups experiment. And there is Fledge, and then opposite of Fledge, there's also Flock. Flock stands for Federated Learning of Cohorts, and they're both basically cohort creating engines. They're the answers to this new world. So if you're picking up on the bird terminology, Fledge and Flock, like a fledgling is off on its own and a flock. So to put that to use, to understand how they interact with each other, what these two things are, Flock is determined by the browser. It's a set of rules. Nobody's putting you into a cohort on their own. Like, no advertisers like, yeah, I'm going to drop this person in this cohort. What's actually happening, I'll read it again, federated learning of cohorts. It's learning. The browser's learning to put you into groups with other people based off of behavior. So much more privacy centric. It just happens naturally. They just discover like keywords and things that you're interacting with, and then you get lumped with other people that have done similar things, and then advertisers can access those lumps or those natural developments of cohorts. On the other side, there's Fledge, where you can define your own cohorts and throw people in there. For privacy reasons, they have to be a certain size before you can actually access them. So you can't go too specific, but you can kind of develop and do your own code. So if you want users that went to Dick's Sporting Goods and are looking specifically at guns and also looked at Nike socks, just something like that might be too specific, but as long as you get enough people and you drill down, Fledge, you can kind of give a little bit more custom and keep exactly the kind of marketing that you've been going through. There is sort of versions of these with inside the last piece of this like concept for like the big words and what's kind of moving around right now. Google's privacy sandbox. So Google's announced this privacy sandbox, which is basically 5 APIs that are going to kind of help you figure out this cohort analysis thing. There's more pieces to it, and I'd be lying if I said I completely understood it. It's new to the market, and they're not even really that well defined. I feel like from Google side, they're kind of just like throwing out some concepts, and they're like, what are people interested in? We'll invest in those and kind of develop them out. But if you're looking to experiment with that kind of concept, I would start looking at Privacy Sandbox now, because that's the kind of thing to get involved in. So thoughts, gentlemen?
So how do they tie these like when you're creating a flock, how do they, if I own abc.com and I also own xyz.com, or sorry, somebody else owns xyz.com, how do they tie those people together? Like what's the engineering behind that on how they know that I am visiting both of those?
Because it's Google, I believe it's literally happening at the browser level.
Yeah.
It's the actual browser that's measuring those things. And then from that browser, you're able to collect basically those cohorts. So if you're an advertiser and you want to pick up on it, you can just pull it out of these things. I don't know this for sure. This is a space that's kind of being fleshed out, and everything that I've read has been linking it to browsers. I haven't seen it in action yet, so I imagine that's how that's working. Regardless, I know the system itself will be something that is dropped there, just measuring user behavior. And the big concepts with both of those, which I'll put air quotes here, is they have to go to trusted servers. So, but like, what's a trusted, like how many companies are trusted companies and have data leaks? But like it's basically, if we go back to what we were talking about with first party data, people aren't worried about what Apple's doing with their data right now because of their public image. So I imagine Google in the advertising world is looking for people that can have that kind of reputation, but can still collect cohorts so that you can still put people and keep the advertising machine going while still being fairly anonymous.
Yeah. So one of the things I was thinking about during the first section when we were talking about logins and stuff, and kind of in with this section now, is what benefit do we see in having a login versus just a dynamically created user ID that you set a cookie in the browser in, right? Like if I honestly don't want to have a login in my website because it is just, I don't know, because I'm an analytics person and I know that if we need to implement a login, it's going to take 6 months for my company to go through that initiative, or a year. And all I really want to do is track my users. What's the downfall of just setting a first party cookie with a dynamic user ID then?
I would say you're insane if you're not doing both. I think you need to try both. And I think the heuristical learning algorithms that match users based off of if your dynamic ID got messed up and tagged twice and things like that are gonna rise. They already were kind of doing well. And obviously we're a Google Cloud partner, but AWS Glue is, so I'm gonna cuss. It's the shit at that. It's real good. Like I haven't worked with Dataflow enough. I haven't done a lot of heuristical stuff in Google Cloud. Before we became Google Cloud partner, I did a workshop with Glue. I actually ended up working with the guy who made Glue. I got lucky and got the workshop with him and walk through, and it's pretty neat. You'll see a lot of tools like that getting really popular. I'm sure Google Cloud's going to have something that already or can compete with that. I just haven't looked into it, but essentially tools that are taking that dynamic ID, that user ID, also other user specific information, figuring out that like, oh, they spelled this wrong or they did this thing, and marrying up your CDPs are basically going to get flushed out by both that dynamic ID and user ID.
It'll actually end up being really interesting to find out, because I envision some companies that like really care about the data and their audiences and knowing about them and stuff like that. It'll be really interesting to find out like how login processes change as well. Like, are they going to try to gather more data about me as I log in? Because I do think that could end up, these like one-click signups could end up becoming a little bit more rare. And now they're going to ask like, where are you located, or what's your age range, stuff like that they could care about in the long run. It'll just be an interesting thing to keep an eye on.
I think you'll see forum captchas all the time now too.
Yeah.
Like getting information like that's, YouTube's already doing that where they have, instead of an ad, they're like, have you heard of these brands? You know what this is? You know, and like you're basic, like they're building out a profile on somebody. I think we'll see a lot more of that. That's definitely a possibility. Okay. I'll talk about one other subject that kind of fits into this. Not completely, but it's parallel. There's a lot of moving pieces in the industry right now, and they're all sort of trying to solve the same problem. And it's really just exciting. It's really cool to see all this going on because we don't really know what's going to win or what's going to be the ultimate solution. But we talked about it probably 2 or 3 months ago. Google released a product called ADH, Ads Data Hub. Essentially what this is they have, Google knows who's interacted with their ads. They know when we said before, like, you know, if I go to abc.com and then xyc.com and then I've done this different thing, if there was ads on those things or where they saw ads and how they've interacted, Google has all that information. And they can't, within a privacy-centric world, tell you that. They're not allowed to tell you that. However, if you wanted to, you said, I want to know all the people that went to these websites or behaved with this thing or saw the ads in this way, you can create, similar to a cohort, it's a query. You can create a segment in ADH of users that had done these things, not on your website, but in their database. Create those users, those segments, pull them out and join them with your own segments. They just have to be a certain size. They have to be large enough that you're not figuring out and rebuilding Google's databases. But that's a concept. That concept in itself is called a walled garden. So they have this walled garden. We're reaching in and doing a bunch of work. We can't really see what's matching all these things together. We just know we're linking these IDs and getting some advertiser IDs back. But behind the scenes, we're actually, you know, gaining access to data we wouldn't normally have. I think as first party grows, ADH isn't going to be the only walled garden. We're going to see a lot of walled garden solutions because basically people are going to be collecting whatever they can collect. And anybody that masters the first party collection game is now going to have all their own data plus can link with other people's data. So that's a really, go ahead.
I want to push back a little bit because I think Google is in a very unique opportunity. And my phone just heard me say Google. But I think because Google Ads has been such a dominating like force, and then Google Search, Google Chrome, those give them so much more data than basically everybody else. That like even if other people I think can create, like there's going to be a few people that could, like I guarantee Facebook could if they wanted to because they have access to so much user data as well. But I think Google is in a very unique position as far as that goes. I don't think there really can be many other competitors.
Yeah, you're 100%. Microsoft maybe could do it, but I don't see them figuring out the analytics game anytime soon. Yeah, that's a really good point, Seth. One thing to talk about though, on the back of that, they are uniquely positioned, but they've done something very, very cool for people that do want to build out big first party sets. I was going to say this in the first section and I missed it. I just saw it in my notes. So I read this article and I understand this fairly well. It's not even out yet. They're releasing something called first party sets. So in the universe where you want to collect things that are first party, but it's not really your website, it looks like a third party tag. Essentially what a first party set is like a whitelist for tags that operate as your website. So you say they're with us. They can operate like a third-party tag or a third-party cookies would, but they're actually with us and we can continue to do that. I don't think it's so egregious as you could say like all the advertisers are with us and then people can just start claiming that they're all first party. But anything that you own, you can go through a process to actually extend so it doesn't actually have to be under your domain. I'm not sure if that even really would work with partners. I don't understand the process yet, but I think that's an interesting concept of being able to claim extra things as being first party, especially if you're someone that owns like say you're a giant news and media company and you own like 300 sites, and you can call them all first party because you own all of them. So now people going between your sites, you can do cross cookie tracking and have a full network tracking across those. And now you have this giant news and media database. And that's where I'm saying like it could lead to walled gardens, maybe not, but you have a giant behavioral database within news and media that you could sell to other news and media people, and you can make them pay to get advertising out of your behavioral data. I see that kind of concept being possible now, especially with the vacuum that was just created. That's like all of a sudden this massive machine that was working is now just being ripped out.
So, Tyler, I have a question. How would you go about claiming that like a tag is first party? Like who is like the authority? And
we pull it up. I read the article, but to be honest, I don't remember fully, and it was interesting concept, but it's not even done yet. So I'm not sure. Let's look at it. It's gonna take me a minute to get up. But yeah, I definitely think that's an interesting concept. That's especially for large companies, to being able to treat your entire ecosystem as first party rather than just your website opens up a lot of avenues. It's definitely interesting. So I don't want to jump completely off this topic, but one other thing I'll bring up, just because I had it down in my notes, is visualization world seems to be getting so good that it's entering into ETL. That's the tools for visualization. So like you've seen like, while I'm pulling this up, I'll talk about this. You've seen basically data engineers get involved with visualization, and then some data engineers were like, well, we could do this better. We could summarize tables better. We could figure out the ETL part of visualization better. And then you get some very intelligent graph theory people that get into visualization and what they're doing over here and how they can get that better. And then you're seeing things like Looker come up that are probably better than, it's like Dataproc in Google Cloud, if you're familiar with Dataproc, which is like interacting with data for like it's TurboTax. So if you don't know how to be an ETL engineer, you can literally just look at tables and connect things and get things done. So it's like a way to interact with that. And then like you're seeing a lot of visualization tools get to that point, which I think is a cool natural like evolution. And you're seeing a new model for data teams spinning up within companies. And I think it's an interesting point to talk on.
So I've actually had some, well, I don't want to necessarily say hands-on experience with Looker, but I've used the tool quite a bit, you know, in getting my certification for that. And like I found it to be an excellent tool, but one where everything is defined as kind of like a code configuration. It's a little bit similar to like a JSON. It's like a JSON type of schema. I mean, it's their own language. It's called LookML, and you can do all sorts of advanced things like templating, complicated joins, and essentially at the end, what you have is like a set of entities that you can explore like in depth. So you can kind of like poke through your data online and run like really complicated analysis. Is that kind of what you were referencing?
Yeah, what's cool about it is like, okay, you can hook Looker because they have their, what's it called? Looker, what's the query language?
Oh, LookML.
LookML. So with LookML, we were evaluating a potential partner that was doing something like Looker. And I find it very, very cool. So what these platforms are doing is they're interfacing with all of the cloud systems. So if you have data in BigQuery, you have data in Azure, you have data in S3, you have data in these places, you can actually hook all of those into Looker, and then you can query them as if they're one thing through LookML. But what's really cool is after you've done that, you can actually export the underlying, I don't know if you can do this with Looker, with the tool you're evaluating. I imagine you can do this with Looker. You can actually pull out that underlying code that was the query that were connected to two different places, and then start interacting with those things. So that's something that it's fairly trivial, but it's not just, you know, a walk in the park for any engineer to be connecting to multiple clouds and pulling different data models and putting them together. So once you've done there's setup work like you're talking about. It's configuration. You're getting in, there's setup work to that. But once you've set up and understand your data model, you can be multi-cloud, you can be whatever. You start moving fast. You can very quickly start connecting things and moving things around. It doesn't matter where your data is or how you're connecting to it. It kind of trivializes the problem of working with that data, which is why I say it's really interesting, because it's a different skill set now for interacting with data. That you don't necessarily need that engineer building these things behind. You do for the initial setup, but then you can kind of have lighter skill people getting a lot done in the BI front.
I would tend to agree. Yeah, I think just the ability to run ad hoc analysis as well. Instead of having a data engineer like running reports, or like building out different integrations that didn't previously exist. I mean, there's a lot of like third-party plugins and stuff, so you can integrate directly with a lot of different Google services and other online platforms as well.
I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but my monitor is actually the sun. So if I put anything white up, this is just, I think I might have the brightest monitors in America. I'm trying to pull up the first party data sets and read about them a little bit more. I don't fully.
So I've got a kind of totally random thought here, but as you guys were talking through, like Looker kind of gave me ideas, and I don't know very much about Looker myself, so this could be totally off, but throwing it out there. So one thing I know we see with a lot of just engineering solutions is kind of this shift roughly every 5 years or so between simpler solutions that are more like end user friendly, but then going back to a more native solution because it gives more flexibility and customizability. And like we see this with like JavaScript frameworks constantly going back and forth between things that are more customizable versus more drag and drop type solutions. And obviously there's space for both, depending on what your goals are. But do you think that we might see something similar kind of in this visualization space as it gets more fleshed out?
I think potentially, like having used Looker myself, it's definitely like a configure it yourself kind of solution. Like you do need to have some knowledge in modeling, especially for performance. If you're using or you're querying like very large data sets, like indexes and like caching and stuff, like all come into play when setting up your instance. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily drag and drop, but like that being said, I think it is a lot simpler than like building a dashboard from scratch. I think there would be a lot of value for features like that, so potentially.
I'm gonna be honest with you, I was reading about first party sets, so I don't completely. This is normally when I would talk, but I didn't hear everything you said. So words.
I think
No, not good.
I think you're right. It's always going to come down to what your use case is. Like there's going to be those needs for custom implementations and stuff. And I don't think that that'll ever change. And like the tricky part is the easier you make it, the less customizable it is as well. So like there's always that fine middle ground that's really, really hard to find. And like if they're going to continue to build on it, it's probably going to make it simpler, but then it's going to make it less customizable. So I think it's a tricky line for them to kind of jump back and forth on as well.
Yeah, I'm guessing based off of what we're talking about, you talked about the potential for standardization on top of some of this visualization world and what that might evolve into.
Kind of the shift back and forth that happens with like engineering solutions in general is you shift towards a solution that's easier, more user-friendly. So things like JavaScript frameworks that make a lot of it more straightforward, but then after a few years, people end up shifting back either because the technology can't keep up with what they're trying to do. So the easier solutions don't work with larger data sets, or they don't work with more like distributed systems, things like that. So then people have to go back to the more native solutions that are more custom built. But then there's kind of that push and pull about every 5 years, I feel like, where, and it depends on your use case, but sometimes it'll be more of a trying to go totally focused on the user experience side of it, is how do we make this solution as easy as possible, but then bouncing back to, all right, how do we give our users the most access to customize and kind of build solutions that are built on native frameworks, basically.
Yeah, I think we're already kind of stepping that way. So one, I don't think just visualization what people are trying to automate. Data science is a hot word and people are trying to automate that too. You get the same ingestion, models will work for the same thing. You might have to retrain them, but you at least have the system up for training and applying models on those same structures, right? So what we looked at analytics for the past 4 years, with the exception of, Heap really disrupting things and then where we are now. But for going back a reasonable amount of time, analytics was largely custom to what you're saying. Like everybody had their own way of doing things, and they were all good except for Adobe. I'm just kidding. But yeah, so they all kind of had their own structure to them. And then what happened? Heap came in. Other company, I shouldn't just give the credit to Heap, but the concept of this event-based analytics, which is basically what GA4 is now, where you're just collecting these things and you can kind of apply logic or structure them down the line. You're just making sure you capture all the behavior and all the metadata with it. You can apply form later. And Google, I love the way Google's approaching GA4, because I think this is where Heap missed the ball. They're doing everything that Heap did, but also doing some of what they did with universal analytics. So they're rolling out of the box reporting and a lot of this stuff. So you're not like, oh, I have to set up analytics from scratch because none of these concepts exist and I have to create them all. I don't have the team or the infrastructure to do this. I thought this was going to be easy tagging. So I think Google's going the right direction with GA4. But the reason I say all this, to tie back to what you're saying, with event-based analytics, we now can modularize everything that goes down behind. We're not on these weird custom structures that have these are their own rules when we have to apply things. So if I have this dashboard that just takes a SQL table and I change analytics softwares, I just need to make sure that software can also make that SQL table. I don't have to worry about what are sessions in that. What are my channel groupings? What are these things? These are all things that I've defined on top of my event-based structure. So now I'm able to react however I want to. So I think the steps that analytics are moving toward exactly what you're talking about. It's moving towards that highly both customizable but also standardizable field. You're kind of in a state where you can do that modular development, which I think is clean and cool. I have to take a breath or I'm going to cough.
No, that was really cool. I didn't even think about how just by everything being event driven, we're less focused on the, I guess, implicit definitions by the different platforms. You no longer are worried about how a session is defined in GA, what resets a session. You're no longer worried about how the can't remember the word now, but basically which channels and attribution. Like you're not worried about how the platform does attribution, because now you're focused on building how you do attribution from the events rather than from the system itself.
Yeah, but that's also so to talk, like, that's really, really cool. But there's advantages to being on Rails too, because our data science team can just stand up a prediction model in a small amount of time because we've worked on a specific system that works against Google Analytics' universal analytics on Rails development. So you implement this event, we now can track and get all of your revenue in real time. And then we have a way via this standard reporting to pull out exactly the information we need to model what your revenue predictions are going to look like, and we can apply it very quick. Doing that for another company that doesn't have that exact same standard, we might have some configuring. I can't just pull the same SQL query that I've used. I can't do these things and kind of act as quickly. So it's good and it's bad, but ultimately I think it's better than it is bad, because the freedom allows you to define what analytics is to you, and that's very important. All right. Well, we're running out of steam a little bit, guys. I don't have any more subjects. I'd like to throw it, if anybody has any questions or subjects they want to talk about, either today and future talks, or just anything that they want to say. I want to give you guys a minute, and feel free to interact with us if you want to. Otherwise, if you guys have any subjects too that we could talk about for a few minutes, I'm up for it.
So one I had roughly thought about was Tyler and Mike. I know you guys have done some of your Google Cloud certifications. I'm curious about what some of the cloud solutions are that are being targeted towards, or I guess just which solutions you think will have a big impact on the analytics space. I know you mentioned Dataproc. We obviously know BigQuery is huge. But what are some of the other things that, because I know between AWS, GCP, and Azure, like each have their own catered things. And I know one reason we're with Google is because of being cloud certified partners, but at the same time, Google, I know a lot of their stuff is more focused on the data space because that's their wheelhouse.
Yeah,
Google's
they have the
company,
only,
not a search company for 20 years now.
people don't realize this, but BigQuery is the only serverless data warehouse platform. It's the only one. There isn't another serverless data warehousing platform. Also, it is by far the cheapest to store. It is kind of expensive to query, not that expensive, and there's flat rate query models with it. So I'll talk more about the solutions, but one of the things that I think people miss with, I've been getting this all the time, so it's worth talking about it constantly. Compare Azure to BigQuery for data storage, and I'm like, what? Please, if you're considering Azure, let's talk about Active Directory. Microsoft's one of the best in permissions in the world. Like that, sure. I'm not here to beat down on any cloud, but BigQuery is the solution. It's not even close. And people say, well, it's getting too expensive. Well, what's happening is BigQuery charges per amount queried, and I believe it's $5 per terabyte queried. And people don't know how to query in BigQuery. The tables are partitioned up and sharded and small, and you can do very efficient queries so that you don't have to keep querying the same massive data set and churning against it all the time. And people have no idea what they're doing, so they just query star and pick up the whole table instead of doing any shards, and then they eat through that money. So I do think that's a point of frustration. But yeah, BigQuery is amazing. So if you're planning on building any kind of data warehouse, it just is the solution. Outside of that, there are two really good solutions to work with in Google Cloud. One, Apache developed a program called Airflow, and Composer uses Apache Airflow, or Cloud Composer. So I believe that's what it's called. Yeah, that's what it's called. Essentially, it's a node-based. It's using what's called DAGs, which is a workflow. But it's a node-based ETL solution. So you say pull from BigQuery, and then from BigQuery transform this, and then send to Facebook, send to Google, send to, like do all these things. So basically you can set up your kind of ETL pipelines, either pushing things out or pulling things down in a node-based system. And it's very good for that. However, it's a little weird with scaling for massive pipelines. Not really great for massive pipelines. So what's something that's very similar to that, but for massive pipelines? Kubeflow, which is Google developed Kubernetes. Obviously, in Google Cloud, you can expect the people to develop Kubernetes to do good things with Kubernetes. They have what's called Kubeflow, which is essentially the same thing, but it's a little bit more expensive, but it's a lot more scalable. You're essentially doing a workflow through a series of nodes, and The bigger advantage to Kubernetes too is it works with streaming data, where Composer's all batch. You take batch data and process them, where Kubernetes can kind of sit and ingest, similar to you would do with like Kinesis.
The other one I'm thinking of, a few of you are not going to be surprised by this answer, AutoML in Google Cloud, especially and to tie it into one of our first things that we talked about. Machine learning is not, it's popular in the analytics space, but it hasn't really taken off. But I imagine, and this is like a crazy idea that I'm thinking of, like, imagine if you could use that ML to create your flocks like we talked about earlier. You could use machine learning to tie users across different sites potentially. Like, I'm a fishing guy, right? If I'm on basspro.com and then I I search for like a yellow crankbait and have 0 results, and then all of a sudden in my data inside of BigQuery, I see that you ended up at cabela's.com next. Boom, my machine learning algorithm can know, hey, this was the same person. This was Mike. So AutoML in Google Cloud could actually help us solve some of our issues when third-party tags go away as well.
There is 2 products there that are interesting to talk about. One of them is AutoML, the other is BigQuery ML. So BigQuery ML is literally right in BigQuery. You write a query and then you're like, apply a model to this. Like, it's literally that easy. You're just clicking through buttons. And then AutoML is like, write a query, pull it out, define your model, train, do it. It's a little bit more of an extracted thing. Both of those are very, very cool. I'll share one of our woes. So one of the things that I do at InfoTrust behind the scenes is I try to figure out growth opportunities. Where should we be going? How do we figure out what our clients want and how to get them to them? And one of the things is we have a really good data science team, and we have a lot of raving data science clients, but it's usually hard to get over that mountain. Getting to that point of that data science sale isn't as easy. So we were looking at ways to do models faster, smaller cost models faster, and then the larger cost, bigger models with big impact. It's just a barrier to entry, so people can understand what they're getting. And kind of, it's similar to doing regular Google Analytics before doing 360. It was a plan for walking people in and understanding the space, which would be an easier way to figure that out. And that was something that we're kind of planning internally. And we're trying to create a propensity model on top of Google Analytics' standard model. And then Google shared with us that you can just do it in BigQuery like today, immediately. So if you have your Google Analytics data in BigQuery right now, you can go apply a propensity model in minutes. Which sort of threw off our plans because we were working on that, but the plan's still the same. We can still step in and kind of do that. But that, just to share, that is a very, very powerful tool. It's usually not going to outperform custom models, which is sort of why I said what I just said. Custom models are a skilled data scientist touch is very, very valuable. However, that AutoML will get you good value for what you're getting out of it. You're putting very low effort and getting good value out of it.
Yeah, I think that product could change the analytics space and just make it so much more valuable eventually, when people figure out how to really utilize it.
Yeah, part of the I would say, anybody that's interested in that, what you need to understand and what you should expect out of the software is you need to know what models you're applying. So what a model can do. So which model do I choose for propensity? What are there's different modeling techniques that are for different things. Some are for patterns, some are for identifying outliers, some they have different purposes within their different modeling techniques. And I am far from the person who would pick those. I lean on my data science team for those. But if understanding what data gets ingested by a model, what that model is solving, and then ultimately what's going to come with the output. If you have that knowledge, the machines will do the rest. You don't need a whole engineering team. You don't need a data science. So it is not a huge barrier to entry, but there is a barrier. It's not just, here's all this data for free and we didn't do anything there. You definitely do need to have some knowledge, but yeah, it's a very, very cool tool. My college data science professor would be proud. The old stats.
Sounds like some really cool things. Yeah, I know. I don't know where I was going with that. I think one area that I've always thought could be interesting is using machine learning, like client side, like doing it in the moment to adjust that user's experience as they're going through.
I mean, honestly, and we haven't talked about this a lot. This is another like huge area. And especially my girlfriend's a designer, so I mean, really, it's a huge area. The third party is going to affect that as well. How basically design is going to be done is going to be completely different. But I've thought of exactly what you're talking about for a long time. The ability to run A/B tests or concepts like that in real time based off of behavior and machine learning is game breaking stuff. That's absolutely, you could basically develop a system that identifies patterns and then validates hypothesis in real time. So your website is currently getting better all the time. It'll develop a hypothesis and validate it all the time. And that's completely doable. And I don't see anybody doing it. Also, InfoTrust isn't going to do that. That's that we're not really in the visualization game or that kind of thing. But that's something that I've always been like, anybody who does that is going to find themselves in a very comfortable spot.
Maybe we know our topic for next month.
Talk about some
machine learning in the analytics space.
Yeah. Maybe we should pull Pam and Chesnika into this for once.
Yeah,
we'll make it like a discovery thing.
It'd be interesting.
Yeah, for Pam and Chesnika are two of our lovely data scientists. But yeah, it'd be nice to have them in here and make us all look stupid. All right. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions coming in, and we're almost out of time. We're kind of at that wall. So we got something coming in. This may be way off topic, but how much will consent affect the first party data collection you guys are talking about? I'm not the absolute expert on this, but we have maybe the expert on the planet on this in InfoTrust. The other day I was on a call with him. His name's Lucas. He works within our tag governance, tag inspector team. And he's one of the product managers over there. And he was citing the compliance documents that were coming out by letter, by number, as they came out by date. I mean, he knows compliance. It was ridiculous. We were writing some content and he was like, well, when Safari came out on this date, on this article, on this thing. And I was like, are you kidding me? Isn't it? So we do have, I'm speaking as Lucas to you right now, but essentially everybody's going to have a governance plan. That's why we have the governance team at InfoTrust is essentially setting up of a plan for people that are just lost on that concept. We essentially have either consulting or products that'll help solve that solution. You need to have some kind of compliance tool. And one of the big things that's being pushed in new privacy is you can't even lean someone towards an answer. You can't say, I'm accepting cookies, and if I want to reject, here's the button like way down here. Like you have to have like a yes and a no and not lean them towards things. So even that compliance world is changing quite a bit. And I can't speak to that as much as Lucas, but I was just going through one of his slide decks and it was talking on that concept quite a bit. However, so you have a compliance thing. Do I opt in? Do I opt out? These are what I can track. This is what I can track if someone doesn't opt in. This is what I can track if they do opt in. And it's basically that goes all the way back to that first party conversation and like what our image is as a company. We are being wide open with communication. This is what we're tracking about you. Whether you say yes or you say no, these are the things that we'll pull. This is the information we're allowed to get. This is the compliance. This is that thing. I don't see it limiting too much, honestly. It really depends. Everybody's been tracking behavioral data on their website since there's been behavioral data, and ultimately it's what you do with it. I mean, even if you're talking about GDPR, you can track all the data you want if all you're ever doing with it is improving your website. So if we're talking about the subject we were just talking about, like feedback into A/B testing and figuring out how to make a better website, you're not even targeting users with it. You're just collecting that data. You can collect all that you want. You can go, it's ultimately how you're using that data that will get you in legal trouble. So I don't even think first party collection is going to be affected that much. And how you're using that data will be defined by that compliance that I was talking about when you're saying yes, no, and kind of the governance and agreement. I don't think it would be huge. All right. Well, that's about that then. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and shut her down. Yep. Have a good day.
Later. Thank you.